The loudest laugh in the ballroom came from the man who would spend years wishing he had stayed silent. Claire Harrison stood beneath a crystal chandelier that scattered golden light across the wedding reception hall, while more than 300 guests celebrated a future she was no longer part of. The luxury resort outside Napa Valley looked like something from a magazine. White roses lined the marble staircase. Champagne glasses reflected warm light. A string quartet played softly near the dance floor. Everything felt perfect. Everything except the woman standing alone near the back of the room. Claire had almost ignored the invitation when it arrived 3 weeks earlier. The envelope was thick, expensive, and impossible to misunderstand. Ethan Harrison was getting married again. Most people would have thrown it away. Most people would have stayed home. Claire had spent 3 days debating whether she should attend. In the end, curiosity won. Perhaps part of her wanted closure. Perhaps part of her wanted proof that she had truly moved on. Now, standing inside the ballroom, she realized closure was rarely found in places built from old wounds. 5 years earlier, she had walked away from her marriage carrying 2 suitcases and a broken understanding of the future. The divorce had become local gossip for months. Ethan's family made certain of that. According to their version of events, Ethan had outgrown the marriage. Claire had become dead weight. An obstacle. Someone who could not keep pace with his ambitions. The story spread quickly because successful people often receive the benefit of belief. Few bothered asking for her side. Fewer still cared. Claire adjusted the sleeve of her navy dress and looked around the room. Faces she once knew filled every table. Former friends. Extended relatives. Business associates. Some recognized her immediately. Others needed a second look. The reactions were almost identical. Surprise first. Then discomfort. Then polite smiles that never quite reached the eyes. She had expected that. What she had not expected was how small she suddenly felt in a room she once belonged to. At the center of the ballroom, Ethan laughed beside his new bride while photographers captured every moment. He looked successful, confident, admired. The exact image everyone expected. Claire watched for only a second before turning away. She did not come here to relive the past. She only wanted confirmation that the chapter had ended. A waiter passed carrying a tray of sparkling water. Claire accepted a glass and moved toward the terrace doors. Fresh evening air sounded far more appealing than forced conversations. Before she could reach the exit, a familiar voice echoed through the room. Well, look who decided to show up. Claire stopped. Ethan's father stood near the head table holding a champagne flute. Several guests turned immediately. Others followed their gaze. Within seconds, attention settled on her. The older man smiled, but the smile carried no warmth. Claire. He raised his glass slightly. I have to admit, I did not think you would come. Soft laughter drifted through nearby tables. Claire forced a polite smile. Thank you for inviting me. Of course. He nodded dramatically. After all, you were part of the family once. More laughter. Not loud. Not cruel enough to appear intentional. Just enough. The kind of laughter that lets people hurt someone while pretending they are joking. Claire felt her stomach tighten. She glanced around the room. Nobody interrupted. Nobody changed the subject. People simply watched. Ethan noticed the exchange but remained silent. That hurt more than the comments themselves. His father stepped closer to the microphone used earlier for speeches. Actually, he said, smiling toward the crowd, seeing Claire here reminds me of something. Several guests leaned forward. Claire already knew she would not enjoy what came next. Sometimes failure is not the end of the story. He paused dramatically. Sometimes it is the lesson that helps other people make better choices. The room erupted with laughter. Glasses clinked. Heads nodded. Someone near the front table even applauded lightly. Claire felt every eye in the ballroom land on her at once. The words were disguised as humor, but everyone understood the target. For a moment, silence settled inside her. Not anger. Not sadness. Something colder. She looked toward Ethan. Surely he would say something. Surely he would stop this. Instead, he lowered his eyes and took a sip from his glass. That single gesture told her everything she needed to know. The ballroom suddenly felt smaller. The music sounded distant. The golden lights above seemed harsher than before. Claire realized she was standing inside a room full of people who had already decided who she was. A failure. A disappointment. A woman left behind while everyone else moved forward. Explaining herself would change nothing. Defending herself would change nothing. Some stories become too convenient for people to surrender. So Claire did the only thing dignity allowed. She smiled. Not a forced smile. Not a bitter one. A calm smile. Then she set her untouched glass on a nearby table and walked toward the exit. Nobody stopped her. Nobody called after her. The ballroom quickly returned to celebration as though she had never been there. Outside, cool California air wrapped around her shoulders. The distant sound of music drifted through the closed doors behind her. The vineyard beyond the resort stretched beneath a sky filled with stars. Claire walked slowly across the stone pathway toward the parking lot. Each step felt lighter than the last. A strange realization settled over her. The humiliation hurt. But not as much as the certainty that followed. The people inside that ballroom believed her story was over. They believed they had already seen how her life ended. Claire opened her car door and paused before getting inside. Through the resort windows, she could still see the celebration continuing without her. Laughter. Dancing. Applause. A world moving forward as though she no longer mattered. She looked at it for several seconds. Then she quietly whispered 4 words that nobody else would ever hear. They do not know yet. Moments later, her car disappeared into the darkness beyond the resort gates while the wedding celebration continued behind her. And somewhere between Napa Valley and the future waiting ahead, Claire Harrison made a decision that would change everything. The hardest thing about losing a place in someone's life is watching them rewrite the story as if you were never there. Claire Harrison arrived home from Napa Valley just after midnight. The highway stretched endlessly beneath her headlights while the wedding reception faded into the darkness behind her. She expected tears. She expected anger. Instead, she felt strangely calm. The words from Ethan's father still echoed in her mind. The laughter. The applause. The certainty in their voices when they spoke about her as though her life had already been measured and judged. Yet beneath the hurt, something else had begun taking shape. A realization. The people inside that ballroom did not actually know her anymore. Perhaps they never had. The following morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds of her small apartment in Sacramento. The space was modest. 1 bedroom. A narrow kitchen. A living room furnished with items collected over time rather than purchased all at once. Nothing looked impressive. Nothing looked successful. Yet everything inside belonged to her. Claire brewed coffee and sat near the window overlooking a quiet street lined with maple trees. A few children rode bicycles along the sidewalk. A delivery truck stopped across the street. Life moved forward with ordinary simplicity. Her phone vibrated repeatedly on the table. Messages continued arriving from people who attended the wedding. Some expressed sympathy. Others pretended the previous evening had not happened. One message stood out. It came from a former friend she had not spoken to in nearly 3 years. I am sorry about what happened. You did not deserve that. Claire stared at the screen before locking the phone. The message was kind. Yet it carried an assumption she no longer wanted. Sympathy. People always offered sympathy after failure. Very few offered respect. Her thoughts drifted back through the years. Back to the beginning. Back before Ethan became successful. Before the expensive houses. Before the business magazines and networking events and luxury vacations everyone associated with him now. She remembered a tiny office above a struggling insurance agency. 2 desks. 1 computer. A broken air conditioning unit that barely functioned during summer. Ethan possessed ambition. Nobody could deny that. But ambition alone never built a company. Claire remembered balancing budgets when cash flow disappeared. Negotiating with vendors when contracts fell apart. Managing operations while Ethan traveled pursuing opportunities. There were years when she worked longer hours than anyone. Yet history rarely remembered invisible contributions. The more successful Ethan became, the less people seemed to remember those early days. Eventually, the narrative changed completely. Ethan became the self-made entrepreneur. Claire became the wife who happened to be present. Then after the divorce, she became something even smaller. A footnote. An obstacle he overcame. A mistake. The realization hurt because it happened gradually. Not through one cruel moment. Through hundreds of small ones. Family gatherings where people credited Ethan alone. Interviews where her contributions disappeared. Conversations where others described events she personally experienced, only somehow she no longer existed inside the story. Claire walked toward a bookshelf near the living room and removed an old photo album. Dust settled across the cover. She opened it carefully. Inside were photographs from years nobody discussed anymore. Ethan standing beside a folding table during a trade convention. Claire helping assemble display materials at midnight. Long road trips across California searching for clients. Tiny victories celebrated with inexpensive dinners because money was scarce. The images felt almost foreign now. Proof of a history many people preferred forgetting. Halfway through the album, a photograph slipped onto the floor. Claire bent down and picked it up. The picture showed the original company team. 5 people standing outside the first office location. Everyone smiling. Everyone exhausted. Claire studied the image quietly. Then something caught her attention. On the back, someone had written a short note years earlier. The people who were here before success arrived. She read the sentence twice. Then a third time. Suddenly the wedding reception made more sense. Ethan's family did not simply underestimate her. They erased her. It was easier that way. Easier to celebrate a success story when inconvenient truths disappeared from the timeline. Easier to believe one person built everything alone. Easier to laugh at someone once their contributions became invisible. That afternoon, Claire visited a local bookstore downtown. She wandered through aisles filled with biographies, business strategy guides, and financial publications. Eventually, she settled near a window overlooking the street and opened a book on corporate leadership. The author discussed resilience, reinvention, the ability to begin again after setbacks. Claire smiled faintly. Everyone loved stories about reinvention. Yet almost nobody respected the years required to create one. Outside, clouds gathered across the sky. A light rain began falling. Pedestrians hurried beneath umbrellas while traffic moved slowly through wet streets. Claire remained by the window reading for hours. Not because she needed distraction. Because something inside her had shifted. For years, she allowed other people to define the ending of her story. The wedding made one thing painfully clear. They were still doing it. The difference now was that she no longer accepted their version. As evening approached, Claire purchased 3 books before leaving the store. Leadership, finance, strategic management, heavy subjects, difficult subjects, the kind of subjects most people avoided after exhausting workdays. Yet as she carried them toward her car, she felt something unfamiliar. Direction. Back at the apartment, she cleared space from the dining table and arranged the books in a neat stack. Rain tapped softly against the window. The room smelled faintly of coffee and paper. Claire opened the first book and turned to page 1. Somewhere beyond Sacramento, Ethan Harrison continued living inside a story where she no longer mattered. Somewhere beyond Sacramento, an entire family still believed they had accurately measured her worth. Claire picked up a pen and began taking notes. None of them knew it yet, but the woman they laughed at was about to become someone they would never see coming. The distance between who you are and who you can become is usually measured in ordinary days that nobody notices. 6 months after the wedding, Claire Harrison lived in a small apartment above a family-owned bakery on the edge of Sacramento. The building was old. The floors creaked during winter. The plumbing complained whenever someone upstairs used too much hot water. Yet every morning before sunrise, the smell of fresh bread drifted through the floorboards and filled her apartment with warmth. Claire had never planned to live there. Life simply led her one step at a time until she arrived. At 5:30 every morning, delivery trucks rolled into the alley below. By 6, The bakery ovens were already working. By 6:15, Claire sat at a narrow wooden table beside the window with a notebook, a cup of coffee, and a schedule packed so tightly that most people would have considered it impossible. Her days followed the same rhythm. Work. Study. Work again. Then more study. She accepted consulting projects for small local businesses whenever she could find them. Nothing glamorous. Nothing impressive. A family restaurant struggling with inventory. A landscaping company trying to improve operations. A retail shop fighting declining sales. The pay was modest. Sometimes barely enough. Yet Claire treated every assignment seriously. Every problem solved was another lesson. Every lesson moved her forward. During the afternoons, she worked remotely for a bookkeeping service. The job paid bills, but offered little excitement. Most people would have viewed it as temporary. Claire viewed it as necessary. Pride could not pay rent. Determination could. At night, while the city settled into silence, she opened textbooks and online courses. Finance. Corporate strategy. Leadership. Business valuation. Subjects that once seemed distant now became part of her daily life. The process was exhausting. There were evenings when her eyes burned from staring at spreadsheets. Nights when she fell asleep with notes scattered across the table. Mornings when she questioned whether any of it mattered. Those moments always passed. Because every time doubt appeared, she remembered the ballroom in Napa Valley. She remembered the laughter. More importantly, she remembered how confidently people believed her future was already decided. One rainy Thursday evening, Claire stopped at the bakery after finishing work. The owner, Mrs. Delgado, stood behind the counter arranging pastries for the next morning. "Long day?" she asked. Claire smiled. "A little." Mrs. Delgado handed her a paper bag containing 2 cinnamon rolls. "Take these. You do not have to do that." "I know." The older woman smiled warmly. "That is why I am doing it." Claire thanked her and started toward the stairs leading upstairs. "Claire." She turned. "Yes." Mrs. Delgado studied her for a moment. "You know, most people quit after 6 months." Claire looked confused. "Quit what?" "Starting over." The words settled quietly between them. Mrs. Delgado shrugged. "Most people get tired. They decide rebuilding is too hard. You have not." Claire smiled softly. "I do not have another choice." "That is where you are wrong." The older woman pointed gently toward the notebook under Claire's arm. "You choose this every day." Later that evening, Claire sat beside the window while rain tapped against the glass. The cinnamon rolls rested untouched beside her laptop. Her attention remained fixed on a financial modeling course she could barely afford. The instructor explained acquisition strategy, market positioning, growth through investment, complex concepts that fascinated her. Somewhere around midnight, she paused the lesson and stared at the city lights beyond the window. Sacramento looked different at night. Quieter. Less demanding. She often imagined thousands of people sleeping while she continued working. Not because she was special. Because she knew exactly what she was trying to escape. Mediocrity imposed by other people's expectations. Weeks became months. Months became nearly 2 years. The routine never changed. Small projects became larger ones. Larger projects became referrals. Referrals became opportunities. Slowly, almost invisibly, Claire developed a reputation. Local business owners began recommending her. Entrepreneurs sought her advice. Former clients introduced her to new clients. None of it happened quickly. That was why it mattered. Real change rarely arrived overnight. One autumn afternoon, Claire finished a consultation meeting downtown and stopped at a cafe before heading home. The place sat on a quiet corner overlooking Capitol Mall. Warm sunlight filtered through large windows. The smell of roasted coffee beans filled the air. Claire ordered a black coffee and settled into a table near the back. She opened her laptop and reviewed notes from a struggling distribution company that recently hired her. For nearly an hour, she worked without noticing anyone around her. Numbers filled the screen. Operational reports. Cost analyses. Staffing projections. She became so focused that she failed to notice an older gentleman sitting alone at the neighboring table. He glanced occasionally toward her laptop, then toward the notes spread across the table. Finally, after almost 20 minutes, he leaned slightly closer. That company has a logistics problem. Claire looked up surprised. Excuse me? He nodded toward the report. Everyone keeps focusing on transportation costs. They are looking in the wrong place. Claire studied him carefully. White hair. Expensive watch. Simple navy jacket. Nothing remarkable at first glance. Yet his confidence suggested experience. And where would you look? She asked. The man smiled. Inventory flow. Claire blinked. That happened to be exactly what she had written in her notes. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then the stranger extended his hand. My name is Robert Whitaker. Claire shook it politely. She had never heard the name before. Yet within a few months, she would discover that the quiet man sitting at table 7 was connected to a world far larger than anything she imagined. And the conversation that began over a cup of coffee was about to change the direction of her entire future. Sometimes the most important opportunities arrive disguised as ordinary conversations. For 3 days after meeting Robert Whitaker at the cafe, Claire Harrison thought about the strange encounter more than she expected. It was not simply because he correctly identified the weakness in the distribution company's operations. It was the way he noticed it. Most people looked at spreadsheets and saw numbers. Robert seemed to see patterns hidden beneath them. The conversation had lasted less than 20 minutes, yet she found herself replaying every detail. Then, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, her phone rang. Claire was reviewing inventory reports for a retail client when she noticed an unfamiliar number. She almost ignored it. Almost. Hello, Claire Harrison? The voice sounded familiar. Yes, this is Robert Whitaker. I hope I am not interrupting. Claire sat up slightly. Not at all. Good. A brief pause followed. I would like to invite you to lunch. 2 days later, Claire arrived at a restaurant overlooking the Sacramento River. The location immediately made her nervous. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the water. White tablecloths covered every table. Business executives occupied nearly every seat. This was not the type of place she normally visited. Robert was already there when she arrived. He stood and greeted her with a warm smile. Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me. Lunch began casually. They discussed business trends, economic forecasts, leadership challenges. Robert asked thoughtful questions and listened carefully to every answer. Unlike many successful people Claire had encountered, he seemed genuinely interested in understanding how she thought. After nearly an hour, he finally leaned back and folded his hands. Do you know why I asked you here? Claire smiled. I have been wondering. Robert nodded toward the river outside the window. Because I have spent 40 years meeting ambitious people. Claire remained silent. Most talk constantly. He smiled. You do not. I am not sure that is a compliment. It is. His expression became serious. You analyze before speaking. That is rare. Claire looked away briefly. Compliments still felt unfamiliar. Robert reached into his briefcase and removed a folder. He slid it across the table. I would like your opinion. Claire opened it carefully. Inside were financial statements, operational reports, and strategic plans from a manufacturing company based outside San Francisco. The business generated strong revenue but suffered declining profitability. Several pages contained handwritten notes and executive comments. Claire spent 15 minutes reviewing the documents. The restaurant disappeared around her. The sounds of conversation faded. Her attention narrowed completely to the information in front of her. Eventually, she looked up. Their expansion strategy is wrong. Robert smiled immediately. Go on. Claire pointed toward the reports. They're adding locations before fixing operational inefficiencies. Revenue growth is hiding deeper problems. She continued explaining her reasoning. Staffing structures. Supply chain weaknesses. Capital allocation. Risk exposure. By the time she finished, nearly 20 minutes had passed. Robert never interrupted once. Finally, he laughed softly. You found the same issues my consulting team missed. Claire blinked. Your consulting team? Robert nodded. The company belongs to me. For several seconds, she thought he was joking. Then she realized he was not. Suddenly, dozens of small details made sense. The expensive watch. The confidence. The depth of his questions. You own the company? One of several. Claire sat back quietly. Robert studied her reaction. You are surprised. A little. Most people would be impressed. Claire smiled faintly. I am still trying to process it. Robert laughed. Fair enough. The conversation continued for another hour. Before leaving, Robert offered something unexpected. I want you to help evaluate the company. Claire stared at him. Me? Yes. You barely know me. Actually, he replied, I know exactly enough. The proposal seemed impossible. The project involved more money, responsibility, and visibility than anything she had handled before. Yet as Robert described the opportunity, something inside her awakened. Not excitement. Recognition. This was the type of work she had spent years preparing for. Every late night, every course, every sacrifice, every lonely evening at the apartment above the bakery. None of it suddenly felt random anymore. Over the following months, Claire traveled frequently between Sacramento and San Francisco. She reviewed facilities, interviewed managers, analyzed performance reports. The work was demanding and complex. She loved every minute of it. For the first time in years, people evaluated her based solely on results rather than assumptions. Nobody cared who her former husband was. Nobody cared about old gossip. Nobody cared about stories told at wedding receptions. They cared whether she could solve problems. And she could. One evening, after presenting recommendations to senior leadership, Claire remained alone inside a conference room overlooking downtown San Francisco. The city lights sparkled across the bay. Ferries moved through the darkness below. Her presentation materials remained scattered across the table. Robert entered quietly carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her. You did well today. Claire accepted it gratefully. Thank you. Robert looked toward the skyline. Do you know what I think is your greatest strength? Claire shook her head. You spent years being underestimated. She smiled faintly. That hardly sounds like a strength. It is. He turned toward her. Because you learned how to build without applause. The words stayed with her long after the meeting ended. Back in Sacramento that night, Claire climbed the stairs to her apartment carrying a laptop full of reports and a mind full of possibilities. The bakery below had already closed. The street outside was quiet. Yet as she unlocked her door, she realized something had changed. For years she had been rebuilding, learning, preparing. Now, for the first time, the future was beginning to open. And somewhere beyond the horizon of opportunities she could already see, an even larger door was waiting to be discovered. Success rarely announces itself. It grows quietly while the world is busy looking somewhere else. 3 years after that first lunch overlooking the Sacramento River, Claire Harrison no longer lived above the bakery. The old apartment remained one of her favorite memories, but life had expanded beyond its narrow walls. She now occupied a modern condominium overlooking downtown San Francisco. Large windows framed the skyline. Ferry horns echoed faintly from the bay each morning. Yet despite the upgraded surroundings, many things about Claire remained unchanged. She still woke before sunrise. She still carried a notebook everywhere. She still believed preparation mattered more than appearances. The difference was that people had finally begun noticing the results. Robert Whitaker's manufacturing company had transformed dramatically under the recommendations she helped implement. Efficiency improved. Revenue increased. Investor confidence returned. What began as a consulting assignment evolved into a long-term partnership. Then another company requested her assistance. Then another. Soon Claire found herself advising organizations throughout California. Some were struggling. Others were successful but wanted to become exceptional. Her reputation spread quietly through executive circles. Not through advertisements. Not through publicity campaigns. Through results. One recommendation led to another conversation. One solved problem led to another opportunity. By the 4th year, Claire had become one of the most trusted strategic advisors in Robert's investment network. Yet outside that world, almost nobody knew her name. She preferred it that way. One autumn evening, she attended a private investor gathering hosted at a hotel overlooking San Francisco Bay. The ballroom buzzed with conversation. Business leaders discussed acquisitions. Entrepreneurs shared growth plans. Investors evaluated opportunities. Claire moved comfortably through the room, speaking with executives who valued her insight. During a break between presentations, Robert joined her near the terrace. "You are becoming difficult to schedule." Claire laughed softly. "That sounds like a complaint." "It is." He smiled. "A successful complaint." They looked across the water as city lights reflected on the bay. "Do you remember the first time we met?" Robert asked. "The cafe. Table 7. Claire nodded. "I remember." Robert smiled. "You had no idea who I was." "I still think that helped." "Probably." His expression became thoughtful. "Do you know what impressed me most?" Claire shook her head. "You never talked about what happened to you." The statement caught her off guard. Robert continued. "Most people carry disappointment like an introduction. They tell everyone about the unfairness, the betrayals, the mistakes." He looked toward her. "You focused on where you were going." Claire considered the words carefully. "Talking about the past never changed it." Robert nodded. "Exactly." Across the room, a presentation screen illuminated with market updates and investment opportunities. Claire glanced toward it absent-mindedly. Then one company name caught her attention. Harrison Ventures. Ethan's company. She had not thought seriously about Ethan in years. Occasionally, his name appeared in articles. Sometimes she heard updates through mutual acquaintances. Nothing more. The emotional weight attached to those memories had faded long ago. Yet, seeing the company name unexpectedly still felt strange. Robert noticed her expression. "You know them?" Claire smiled faintly. "A long time ago." He studied the screen briefly. "Interesting company." "How so?" "Fast growth. Aggressive expansion." He paused. "But I see warning signs." Claire looked more closely at the information displayed. Several details stood out immediately. Rising overhead costs. Declining operational efficiency. Heavy investment in image-driven projects. The numbers appeared strong at first glance. Yet underneath, subtle weaknesses were emerging. She recognized the pattern because she had seen it before. Success creating overconfidence. "You are concerned," Robert observed. Claire nodded slowly. "A little." "About the company?" "About leadership." Robert smiled knowingly. The two are often connected. The conversation moved on. Yet the information lingered in her thoughts. Not because she wanted revenge. Not because she cared what happened to Ethan. Because business patterns fascinated her. And patterns rarely lied. Over the following year, Claire's influence continued growing. She became a partner within Robert's expanding investment group. Major acquisitions passed across her desk. National conferences requested her participation. Financial publications occasionally quoted her analysis. Every achievement felt earned. Every opportunity traced back to thousands of quiet hours nobody witnessed. One winter morning, she arrived at the firm's headquarters for a quarterly strategy meeting. The office occupied several floors of a glass tower overlooking the Embarcadero. Senior partners gathered inside a conference room surrounded by panoramic views of the city. Reports covered the table. Market forecasts appeared on large screens. Discussions focused on future investments. Midway through the meeting, a new presentation appeared. Acquisition watch list. Companies being monitored for potential opportunities. Claire reviewed the names casually until one immediately captured her attention. Harrison Ventures. The room continued discussing financial indicators while Claire remained silent. Not shocked. Not emotional. Simply thoughtful. One executive pointed toward the screen. Strong public image. Weakening fundamentals. Another nodded. Potential acquisition target within the next few years. Claire listened carefully. Nobody in the room knew the personal history attached to the company name. Nobody knew she once helped build the foundation beneath a similar business model. Robert glanced toward her from across the table. Their eyes met briefly. He seemed to recognize her interest. After the meeting ended, he approached quietly. "What are you thinking?" Claire looked once more at the acquisition report resting in her hands. The future suddenly felt closer than before. Not because she was searching for the past, because the past appeared to be moving toward her. She smiled thoughtfully. "I think some stories take longer to finish than people expect." Robert followed her gaze toward the company name printed across the report. Then he smiled as well. Because somewhere beyond the horizon of ordinary business decisions, a moment was approaching that neither of them could fully predict. And when it arrived, the people who once believed they knew exactly who Claire Harrison was would discover how completely wrong they had been. The past rarely knocks on the door when you expect it. Sometimes it arrives in a simple envelope resting among ordinary mail. 7 years had passed since the wedding in Napa Valley. 7 years since Claire Harrison walked away from a ballroom full of laughter and assumptions. The life she built since then looked nothing like the future people predicted for her. She now served as a senior partner within Whitaker Strategic Capital, one of the fastest-growing investment groups on the West Coast. Her calendar was filled months in advance. Executives sought her guidance. Investors trusted her judgment. Yet, despite everything she accomplished, Claire remained remarkably private. She rarely appeared in interviews. She avoided social media. Most people knew her work far better than they knew her face. On a quiet Thursday evening, she returned to her condominium after a long day of meetings. Fog drifted across San Francisco Bay outside the windows. The city glowed beneath soft evening light. Claire placed her briefcase near the kitchen and sorted through a stack of mail resting on the counter. Utility notices, financial reports, event invitations. One envelope immediately caught her attention. The paper was thick, elegant, familiar. She froze before even opening it. The logo printed in the corner belonged to the Rutherford Grand Resort in Napa Valley. Her fingers remained still for several seconds. Then she carefully opened the envelope. Inside was an invitation. The resort was celebrating its 50th anniversary with an exclusive gala honoring influential business leaders, investors, and community partners. Hundreds of guests were expected to attend. National media would cover portions of the event. Prominent executives from across the country would be present. Claire read the invitation twice, then a third time. The location mattered. The date mattered. Everything about it felt strangely familiar. The same resort, the same grand ballroom, the same marble staircase, the same crystal chandeliers. The place where she once became a joke told between champagne toasts. She placed the invitation on the counter and walked toward the window overlooking the bay. Ferries moved through the evening fog. Traffic lights flickered beneath the skyline. The city remained calm. Her thoughts did not. The invitation stayed on her mind for days. She carried it inside her briefcase. Read it during flights. Considered it between meetings. Part of her saw no reason to attend. The event offered little professional value. Another part understood exactly why fate seemed determined to place that envelope in her hands. 1 week later, Claire met Robert Whitaker for breakfast at a waterfront restaurant near the Embarcadero. Morning sunlight reflected across the water while sailboats drifted through the harbor. Robert noticed the invitation resting beside her coffee cup almost immediately. "You are still thinking about it." Claire smiled. "Is it that obvious?" "Only because you never hesitate about anything else." She looked down at the envelope. "I am not sure why it matters." Robert laughed softly. "That is not true." Claire remained silent. Robert leaned back in his chair. "You spent years rebuilding your life. Yet one place still carries weight. Maybe, not because of what happened there." He pointed toward the invitation. "Because you never returned." The observation settled quietly between them. Robert was right. She had traveled across the country, spoke at conferences, led acquisitions, negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Yet she never returned to that ballroom. Never walked through those doors again. It was easier that way. Safer. "Do you think I should go?" she finally asked. Robert smiled. "I think the decision stopped being about the event a long time ago." The gala approached quickly. As the date drew closer, Claire noticed something unexpected. She was not nervous, not angry, not even anxious. The emotions she once associated with Napa Valley had faded over time. What remained was curiosity. She wondered how the place would feel now. She wondered whether anyone would recognize her. More importantly, she wondered whether she would recognize the version of herself who left all those years ago. The answer arrived the night before the event. Claire stood alone inside her dressing room preparing for another business dinner when she caught her reflection in the mirror. For a moment, memories overlapped. The woman who once drove away from the wedding carrying humiliation and uncertainty. The woman standing here now surrounded by confidence earned through years of discipline. They looked like two different people, yet they were the same person. That realization changed everything. The next morning, she contacted the event coordinator. "I will be attending." Preparations moved quickly after that. Hotel arrangements, transportation details, security logistics. As one of the gala's primary sponsors through Whitaker Strategic Capital, Claire would receive VIP access throughout the event. Ironically, her involvement had been planned months earlier by investment teams handling sponsorship agreements. Nobody realized the personal significance. Or perhaps destiny simply enjoyed a sense of humor. 2 days later, a black luxury sedan carried Claire north through California wine country. Vineyards stretched endlessly beneath bright skies. Hills rolled across the horizon. Familiar roads appeared one by one. The closer she came, the quieter she became. Not from fear, from reflection. Eventually, the resort appeared beyond rows of carefully maintained vineyards. Beautiful, elegant, unchanged. The same grand entrance, the same stone pathways, the same towering windows reflecting afternoon sunlight. Claire stepped from the car and looked toward the building. Years ago, she left this place believing she had lost something important. Today she returned knowing she had found something far more valuable. Inside the lobby, guests checked in while event staff prepared for the evening celebration. Nobody paid special attention to the elegant woman crossing the marble floor. Nobody recognized her. Not yet. And as Claire accepted her room key and glanced toward the ballroom doors visible across the lobby, she sensed that the next chapter of her story was about to begin. People expect transformation to announce itself. They expect dramatic entrances, unforgettable speeches, and obvious displays of success. The truth is often far quieter. Claire Harrison stepped into the Rutherford Grand Ballroom just after 7 o'clock that evening, and nobody recognized her. The ballroom looked almost exactly as she remembered. Crystal chandeliers scattered golden light across polished marble floors. Soft music drifted from a live orchestra positioned near the stage. Waiters moved gracefully between groups of guests carrying silver trays filled with sparkling water and appetizers. The room held hundreds of influential people. Investors, executives, politicians, entrepreneurs. Conversations blended into a steady hum beneath the elegant atmosphere. Claire paused briefly near the entrance. 7 years earlier, she had stood in this same room feeling smaller than everyone around her. Tonight felt different. Not because the room had changed. Because she had. She adjusted the sleeve of her emerald evening gown and accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing server. Then she stepped into the crowd. Almost immediately, people began greeting her. Several executives from New York recognized her from recent acquisitions. An investor from Chicago approached to discuss a conference panel she had moderated earlier that year. A technology founder introduced himself and thanked her for advice she once provided during a private meeting. Each conversation flowed naturally, respectfully. Yet what fascinated Claire most was how nobody connected her to the woman who once left this ballroom humiliated. Time had changed more than circumstances. It had changed perception. Across the room, another familiar face entered her field of vision. Ethan Harrison. He stood near the center of the ballroom surrounded by business associates. Age had softened some of the sharpness she remembered. Gray touched the edges of his hair. Experience showed itself in subtle lines around his eyes. Yet his confidence remained unchanged. People still listened when he spoke. They still laughed at his jokes. They still viewed him as successful. Claire watched for only a moment before returning to her conversation. The sight stirred surprisingly little emotion. No anger. No sadness. No resentment. Only distance. Like looking at a city she once visited years ago. Meanwhile, Ethan noticed her without realizing who she was. The elegant woman in green had already attracted attention throughout the ballroom. Several prominent investors approached her. Event organizers greeted her personally. Senior executives seemed eager to speak with her. Ethan observed the interactions with mild curiosity. "Who is she?" one associate asked quietly. Ethan glanced toward Claire again. "I am not sure." Another executive joined the conversation. She arrived with the Whitaker Strategic Capital Group. That information immediately increased interest. Whitaker Strategic Capital had become one of the most respected investment firms in the country. Their influence extended across multiple industries. Yet, despite their prominence, many of their senior partners maintained unusually low public profiles. "Interesting," Ethan replied. His attention lingered briefly before shifting elsewhere. Across the ballroom, Claire continued moving through conversations with effortless confidence. The transformation was not visible through clothing or appearance alone. It revealed itself through posture, through composure, through the quiet certainty that comes from years of earning every opportunity. Near the terrace doors, she found herself standing beside two women discussing the evening's sponsorship program. "Apparently the lead sponsor is someone very important," one said. "I heard they are funding multiple community initiatives through the Resort Foundation." The other nodded. "Nobody seems to know much about them." Claire smiled faintly into her glass. Some things never changed. People remained fascinated by mystery. As the evening progressed, more guests arrived. The ballroom grew increasingly crowded. Familiar faces from California's business community filled every corner of the room. Then something unexpected happened. Claire recognized several members of Ethan's family near one of the reception areas. His sister, his uncle, even his father. Older now, but unmistakably the same man whose toast years earlier became the final push she needed to change her life. For a brief moment, Claire wondered if he would recognize her. The answer arrived quickly. He looked directly at her while speaking with another guest. His eyes passed over her without the slightest sign of recognition. Claire almost laughed. Not because the situation felt satisfying, because it felt symbolic. Years ago, they dismissed her so completely that now they could not even identify her standing a few feet away. Later in the evening, event staff began encouraging guests toward the ballroom center. The formal program would begin soon. Large projection screens illuminated above the stage. Music softened. Conversations gradually settled. Claire moved toward a reserved table near the front. Several people greeted her warmly as she approached. Again, Ethan noticed. Again, curiosity crossed his face. The woman seemed connected to everyone important, yet somehow remained unfamiliar. He searched his memory unsuccessfully. The answer remained just beyond reach. The master of ceremonies eventually stepped onto the stage. Applause filled the room. Guests settled into their seats. Cameras positioned themselves strategically throughout the ballroom. The evening's presentations officially began. Awards were distributed. Community achievements were recognized. Partnership announcements generated enthusiastic reactions. Claire listened politely while the program unfolded. Yet, she sensed something larger approaching. The event coordinator had contacted her twice earlier that afternoon regarding final details. Timing mattered. Placement mattered. Everything was being carefully prepared. Around her, nobody suspected anything. Not Ethan. Not his family. Not the guests seated throughout the ballroom. They continued enjoying the evening exactly as they had years before. The difference was that tonight, the story belonged to someone else. As the program approached its final segment, the master of ceremonies returned to the stage holding a sealed envelope. His smile widened noticeably. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "we would now like to recognize the visionary leader whose generosity and partnership made tonight's celebration possible." The ballroom grew quiet. Hundreds of guests turned toward the stage. Claire slowly placed her glass on the table. And for the first time all evening, every piece of the past and present began moving toward the same moment. The truth rarely arrives with noise. More often, it enters a room quietly and allows everyone else to reveal themselves first. The ballroom fell completely silent as the master of ceremonies held the envelope beneath the spotlight. Hundreds of guests watched expectantly. Crystal chandeliers reflected golden light across the audience. Camera crews adjusted their positions. The atmosphere carried the anticipation of an important announcement. "Tonight," the presenter said, smiling toward the crowd, "we recognize an individual whose leadership, vision, and generosity have helped transform businesses, strengthen communities, and create opportunities for thousands of people across the country." Applause echoed politely throughout the room. Claire remained seated near the front. Calm. Composed. Almost invisible despite everything about to happen. The presenter continued. "This year's principal sponsor and recipient of the Rutherford Legacy Award is senior partner of Whitaker Strategic Capital, Ms. Claire Harrison." For 1 second, nothing happened. The room seemed to freeze between recognition and disbelief. Then the spotlight moved across the audience and stopped directly on Claire. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. Heads turned immediately. Conversations ended mid-sentence. Expressions shifted from curiosity to shock. Claire rose gracefully from her chair. The emerald gown caught the light as she stood. Applause began slowly, then intensified, then grew into a standing ovation. Around the ballroom, guests rose to their feet one by one. Executives, investors, community leaders, industry pioneers. The applause became thunderous. Yet Claire's attention drifted toward a very specific table near the center of the room. Ethan Harrison remained standing like everyone else, but the expression on his face revealed everything. Confusion, recognition, disbelief. The pieces were finally connecting. The elegant woman he noticed throughout the evening. The respected executive surrounded by influential people. The mysterious sponsor nobody seemed to know. It was Claire, his former wife. The woman everyone dismissed years ago. Nearby, Ethan's father looked equally stunned. The older man's eyes never left the stage. The confidence that once accompanied every judgment and assumption had vanished completely. Claire walked toward the platform while applause continued filling the ballroom. Each step felt strangely peaceful. Not triumphant. Not vindictive. Peaceful. Because she no longer needed anything from the people watching her. Their approval had arrived years too late to matter. When she reached the stage, the presenter greeted her warmly and handed her the award. Cameras flashed repeatedly. The audience remained standing. Claire accepted the crystal sculpture and thanked him quietly. Then she turned toward the crowd. The applause gradually faded. Hundreds of faces looked back at her. Many recognized her accomplishments. Others recognized her history. A few recognized both. The presenter offered her the microphone. Claire accepted it but remained silent for several seconds. The ballroom grew completely still. "Thank you," she finally said. Her voice carried clearly across the room. Calm, confident, genuine. "I am honored to receive this recognition." She paused briefly. "But if there is one thing I have learned during my career, it is that success is never built alone." Several guests nodded. Claire continued. "Every meaningful achievement in my life came from people who believed in potential before results existed." Her eyes drifted briefly toward Robert Whitaker seated near the front. People who offered opportunities instead of assumptions. Applause erupted again. Robert smiled but remained seated. Claire waited until the room settled once more. "Years ago, I thought success meant proving people wrong." The statement immediately captured the audience. "I thought it meant returning every doubt with evidence. Every criticism with accomplishment." She smiled softly. "I was mistaken." Silence returned. The greatest victories are not about proving anything. They are about becoming the person you were always capable of being. The ballroom remained completely focused on every word. Sometimes life places you in rooms where people underestimate you. Claire's voice remained steady. Sometimes they decide you are before they know your story. Several guests exchanged thoughtful glances. What matters is not what they believe. What matters is what you choose to build afterward. The applause that followed felt different. More personal. More sincere. Claire thanked the audience once more before returning the microphone. The speech lasted less than 3 minutes. Yet somehow it carried more weight than any lengthy presentation could have achieved. As she stepped away from the podium, dozens of people moved forward hoping to speak with her. Industry leaders, reporters, investors, community partners. The evening's attention shifted entirely. Yet amid the crowd, one figure remained motionless. Ethan. Their eyes met briefly across the ballroom. No anger passed between them. No accusation. No resentment. Only recognition. For the first time in many years, he was seeing her clearly. Not as an extension of his story. Not as a supporting character in his success. As her own person. Independent. Accomplished. Respected. Complete. Later that evening, while guests gathered for photographs and interviews, another announcement quietly circulated through executive conversations. Whitaker Strategic Capital had recently increased its monitoring of several acquisition candidates. Among them was Harrison Ventures, the company Ethan built. The company facing growing financial pressures. The company many analysts now viewed as vulnerable. The details spread quietly through business circles. Not as gossip. As market reality. Claire heard the discussions, but chose not to participate. She did not need to. The numbers would speak for themselves. The truth always did. Across the ballroom, people continued congratulating her. Yet the most remarkable thing about the evening was not the applause. Not the recognition. Not even the shock visible on familiar faces. It was the realization that the woman who once walked out of this ballroom feeling forgotten had returned without needing revenge at all. Because long before she stepped onto that stage, she had already won. The most powerful ending is not the moment people finally recognize your worth. It is the moment their recognition no longer determines how you feel about yourself. The gala continued long after the applause faded. Conversations filled the ballroom once again. Reporters interviewed award recipients. Photographers captured groups of executives beneath the crystal chandeliers. Waiters moved between tables carrying trays of refreshments while guests reflected on the evening's surprises. Yet for many people, only one topic mattered. Claire Harrison. The woman nobody recognized when she entered. The woman everyone suddenly remembered when her name appeared on the screen. Claire spent the next hour greeting guests, accepting congratulations, and discussing future initiatives supported through Whitaker Strategic Capital. She answered questions graciously. Smiled for photographs. Thanked organizers for their hospitality. Through it all, she remained exactly as she had become over the previous 7 years. Calm. Grounded. Unshaken by attention. Eventually, the crowd around her began thinning. Guests returned to their conversations. The formal program ended. Music drifted softly through the ballroom once more. Claire stepped onto the terrace overlooking the vineyards. Cool evening air welcomed her immediately. Beyond the stone railing, rows of grapevines stretched into the darkness beneath a sky filled with stars. The same view existed years earlier. The same hills. The same moonlight. The same quiet beauty. Only she had changed. She rested her hands lightly on the railing and allowed herself a moment of stillness. No cameras. No applause. No expectations. Just silence. Footsteps approached behind her. She already knew who it would be. Claire. Ethan's voice sounded older than she remembered. She turned slowly. For a moment neither spoke. Years of history stood between them. Not hostility. Not regret. Simply history. Ethan offered a small smile. I was not sure you would want to talk. Claire returned the smile politely. It is all right. He nodded. The silence lingered briefly. You look well. Thank you. You seem happy. Claire glanced toward the vineyards. I am. Ethan followed her gaze. I owe you an apology. The words arrived without hesitation. Without excuses. Without conditions. Claire listened quietly. I should have said something that night. His expression reflected genuine regret. Years ago. In the ballroom. Claire knew exactly which night he meant. You did not deserve any of it. She studied him for a moment before answering. That was a long time ago. I know. He looked down briefly. But I still remember it. Claire believed him. The years had changed both of them. Age often removed the certainty people carried when they were younger. Ethan took a slow breath. When I saw your name tonight, I realized something. What is that? I never really understood how much you contributed. The honesty surprised her. Not because she needed it. Because it arrived without defensiveness. The company. The early years. Everything. He shook his head slightly. I spent a long time telling myself a version of the story that was easier to believe. Claire smiled faintly. Most people do. Ethan laughed softly. That sounds like something you would have said back then. Maybe. Another silence settled between them. Comfortable this time. Neither trying to win. Neither trying to prove anything. Finally, Ethan glanced toward the ballroom. There is something else. Claire waited. A few months ago, I started hearing your name in business circles. He smiled. At first I thought it was someone else. And now? Now I know better. Claire laughed quietly. Ethan shook his head in disbelief. You built something remarkable. She considered the statement carefully. I built a life I am proud of. That might be even better. For the first time all evening, Claire felt genuine gratitude for the conversation. Not because it changed the past. Because it confirmed how far she had traveled beyond it. Eventually, Ethan extended his hand. A simple gesture. Respectful. Final. Claire accepted it. Congratulations, he said sincerely. Thank you. He nodded once more before returning toward the ballroom. No dramatic farewell followed. No attempt to rewrite history. No request for another chance. Some chapters are meant to stay closed. As Ethan disappeared through the terrace doors, Claire remained outside beneath the stars. A few minutes later, Robert Whitaker joined her carrying 2 glasses of sparkling water. He handed one to her. I thought you might be out here. Claire accepted it gratefully. You know me too well. Robert smiled. How are you feeling? Claire looked across the vineyard stretching beneath the moonlight. She thought about the wedding, the laughter, the apartment above the bakery, the long nights studying, the coffee shop conversation that changed everything, the years spent building a future nobody could see. Then she thought about the ballroom behind her, about the applause, about the recognition, about the people who finally understood what they once overlooked. She smiled. Peaceful. Robert nodded as if he expected that answer. Together they stood quietly beneath the night sky. The resort lights glowed warmly behind them. Music drifted through open terrace doors. Somewhere inside, guests continued celebrating. But Claire no longer needed the room. She no longer needed the applause. She no longer needed anyone's permission to feel successful. The woman who once left this place carrying humiliation had returned carrying something far more valuable. Confidence earned through perseverance. Dignity strengthened by adversity. Freedom created through her own choices. After a while, Claire placed her empty glass on a nearby table and turned toward the exit leading away from the ballroom. Robert followed beside her. Neither looked back. There was no reason to. The past had finally reached its ending. And as Claire walked beneath the lights of the resort one final time, she understood a truth that would stay with her forever. She did not win because others finally recognized her value. She won because she learned to recognize it herself.